In the summer of 1757, during one of the most intense and widespread European wars of the 18th century, the Battle of Kolin took place, one of the key military events in the context of what became known as the Prussian War, or more precisely, the 7 Years' War. This battle brought together the ambitions of the Prussian king Frederick II, known as Frederick the Great, to expand eastward into Bohemian lands, and the resolve of Austrian Empress Maria Theresa to defend her territories and uphold her imperial honor. The 7 Years' War erupted in 1756 as a result of a radical shift in European power alliances, a realignment later referred to as the Diplomatic Revolution. Under the rule of Frederick II, the Kingdom of Prussia had begun to rise as a modern and centralized military power, while Austria sought to reclaim its position after the loss of the rich province of Silesia during the War of the Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748. That province, the industrial and resource-rich heart of the Austrian crown, had become a symbol of Austrian humiliation in the face of Frederick's strength and ambition. Recovering it became a central goal for Empress Maria Theresa. In this tense atmosphere, new alliances were formed, disrupting the traditional political map of Europe. Catholic France moved closer to its historical rival Austria in a joint effort to counter Prussian expansion. In turn, Prussia found a powerful ally in Britain, which was also eager to curb French influence, especially overseas. Behind these alliances, Russia watched with growing concern as Prussia's influence expanded in Eastern Europe, while Sweden, after decades of decline, attempted to reassert itself on the continental stage. Frederick the Great did not wait for a ring of enemies to fully form around his kingdom. Instead, he took the initiative and launched a surprise attack on Saxony in 1756, a neutral state at the time, but allied with Austria. The invasion of Saxony served as a prelude to his push into the heart of Bohemia, the central province of the Austrian crown. Frederick aimed to deliver a crushing victory that would isolate Austria from its allies and force a favorable settlement for Prussia before Russia and France could mobilize fully. Thus, the war shifted from a border conflict to an existential struggle for influence and dominance in the heart of Central Europe, between a young king with boundless ambition and an empress determined to reclaim the glory of her forebears. On the morning of June 18, 1757, the Prussian army under Frederick II stood near the town of Kolin in the Bohemian countryside, aiming to deliver another decisive blow to break Austrian resistance and pave the way for the fall of Bohemia. Frederick's army numbered around 34,000 troops, most of them battle-worn veterans from the Battle of Prague a few weeks earlier, tired but disciplined. Opposing them were more than 50,000 well-organized and well-equipped Austrian troops under General Leopold von Daun, who had just arrived from the south to relieve the capital, Prague, and lift the siege. Frederick's plan, one he had repeated in previous battles, relied on swift maneuvering and flanking the enemy's right wing. He deployed his main force to sweep behind a chain of hills in an effort to surprise the Austrian flank and trigger a gradual collapse that would unravel the enemy's rear lines. However, Daun, a cautious and seasoned commander, had studied Frederick's tactics closely. He arranged his defenses in harmony with the terrain, making use of the high ground, small hills, and surrounding farms to create a solid defensive network capable of absorbing a surprise attack. The Prussian assault began in the afternoon, delayed from its original schedule due to the difficulty of moving across uneven terrain. Nevertheless, Frederick launched a fierce attack on the Austrian right flank, achieving an initial advance as the Prussian forces pushed the Austrian infantry into partial retreat. However, this progress was insufficient. The attacking troops came under heavy fire from Austrian artillery positioned on the hills and were hit by swift cavalry counterattacks from the rear, which disrupted the Prussian ranks. As the day wore on, signs of exhaustion became evident among the Prussian soldiers. The flanking maneuver had required a long march under the sun, and the units lacked sufficient depth and support. In contrast, Daun had preserved his reserves in an orderly fashion, And when he recognized the fatigue in his opponent, he ordered a coordinated counteroffensive. Austrian troops surged from both flanks, while the center held firm against attempts at breakthrough. Frederick suddenly found himself in a defensive position, trying to contain the collapse of his left wing after having been the aggressor, and he was forced to issue orders for a gradual withdrawal in an attempt to save what remained of his army. By sunset, the battlefield was littered with corpses, smoke, and blood. The Prussians lost around 14,000 men, killed, wounded, or captured, a heavy toll relative to the size of their force. The Austrian army, though it suffered about 8,000 casualties, managed to secure full control of the battlefield and forced the Prussians to retreat northeast, away from Prague. This was Frederick the Great's first major military defeat, and it made clear that he was not facing a weak and disorganized Austrian army, but rather a capable adversary who could match him in tactical skill and battlefield cunning. The Battle of Kolín marked a decisive turning point in the 7 Years' War and imposed a new strategic reality on all sides of the conflict, especially for Frederick, who suffered the first true defeat in his military record. The most immediate and urgent consequence was his need to lift the siege of Prague, abandoning his hopes of capturing it and pressuring Austria into peace on Prussian terms. With his exhausted army retreating to northern Bohemia, Austria regained the initiative and succeeded in reinforcing its defenses, paving the way for a new phase of strong resistance against Prussian expansion. On the military level, the battle proved that the Austrian army was no longer the confused and ineffective force of the early century, but a disciplined power capable of absorbing systematic attacks and responding effectively. Leopold von Daun emerged as an exceptional commander, not only because he halted Frederick's advance, but because he did so without recklessly endangering his forces in open combat. He relied on a cohesive defense and decisive counterattacks. This Austrian victory provided a significant morale boost and renewed confidence in the possibility of reclaiming Silesia in the future, reinforcing the unity of the Austrian-French-Russian alliance. Politically, the battle had a deep psychological impact on Frederick II. Despite his toughness and bravery, the defeat at Kolin was a true shock. It was the first time his famous flanking maneuver had completely collapsed. Although he later recovered and regained some initiative in future battles, the myth of his invincible army had been shattered, and his enemies began to face him with greater confidence and equality. On another front, Austria's victory encouraged Russia to step up its engagement on the Eastern Front, seeing in Prussia's defeat a chance to reshape the balance of power in Central Europe in its favor. France, too, was emboldened to escalate its operations in the West, now convinced that Prussia would not be able to quickly win in Bohemia and would be drawn into a prolonged war of attrition. Thus, the 7 Years' War transformed from the swift campaign Frederick had envisioned to subdue his rivals into a long and bloody struggle between evenly matched coalitions. Victory would no longer depend solely on the genius of a single commander, but on each side's capacity for endurance, mobilization, and coordination across multiple fronts. In the end, the Battle of Kolin was more than just a conventional military engagement. It was the beginning of the end for the illusion of Prussian supremacy and a clear message that Frederick's imperial ambitions would meet fierce resistance, that Central Europe would not easily submit to the rule of a king trying to impose his vision by the sword alone.